Would you sue your landlord for millions if you discovered he'd been secretly filming you in your bedroom for 2 years? The smoke detector was beeping, that annoying, irregular chirp that means the battery is dying. I'd been ignoring it for 3 days because I hate changing smoke detector batteries. You need a ladder, and mine was in the basement storage unit, and it was just easier to pretend I didn't hear it. But Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., the chirping woke me up for the 3rd day in a row, and I'd had enough. I dragged a chair from my kitchen into my bedroom, climbed up, and twisted the smoke detector off its mount, popped open the back to replace the battery. That's when I saw it. A small lens, tiny, professional grade, embedded in the smoke detector casing where the battery compartment was, connected to a circuit board that had nothing to do with smoke detection. A camera. There was a camera in my smoke detector. I stood on that chair for probably 5 minutes, just staring at it, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing, trying to find an innocent explanation that didn't exist. Someone had put a camera in my bedroom smoke detector. Someone had been watching me in my bedroom for however long this had been here. I climbed down carefully, hands shaking, grabbed my phone, Googled camera and smoke detector with trembling fingers. Hundreds of results, articles about hidden camera smoke detectors, how to detect them, how common they are in rental properties, horror stories from people who'd found them. I felt sick, actually physically sick, because I'd lived in this apartment for 2 years. 2 years of sleeping, changing clothes, existing in privacy that apparently wasn't private at all. I looked around my bedroom with new eyes. What else had cameras? What else was watching me? The digital clock on my nightstand. I picked it up, examined it closely, found a tiny lens pointed at my bed. The air purifier in the corner, opened the casing, found another camera, the bookshelf speaker. Camera. 4 cameras in my bedroom alone, all pointed at my bed from different angles. I went through my entire apartment methodically. Living room, camera in the TV, camera in the decorative plant pot, camera in the cable box. Bathroom, camera in the ventilation fan, camera in the bathroom mirror, a 2-way mirror that I'd never questioned because it came with the apartment. Kitchen, camera in the microwave, camera above the cabinets. 11 cameras total throughout my entire apartment, watching everything, recording everything. I'd lived here for 2 years, 730 days of being filmed without my knowledge or consent. I sat on my couch, facing away from the cameras I'd found, and tried to think clearly through the panic. Who put these here? The obvious answer was my landlord, Robert Chen. He owned the building, had access to all the units, had given me the fully furnished apartment with all these electronics already installed. I'd thought I was getting a deal, discounted rent in exchange for taking the place furnished. I'd been so grateful, so naive. Robert had installed cameras in a furnished apartment and rented it to me, had been watching me for 2 years, had footage of me sleeping, changing, showering, existing in what I thought was privacy. The violation was overwhelming. I felt exposed, dirty, like my skin was crawling with the knowledge that someone had been watching me without my consent for 730 days. I wanted to destroy the cameras immediately, wanted to smash every single one, but some rational part of my brain said, evidence. Don't destroy evidence. You need proof of what he did. I called the police. The officer who responded was young, maybe late 20s. He took my statement, examined the cameras, and called for a detective. Detective Sarah Park arrived an hour later, mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who'd seen everything and couldn't be shocked. Until she saw 11 cameras hidden throughout my apartment. Jesus, she said, examining the smoke detector camera. This is professional installation, expensive equipment. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. My landlord, it has to be my landlord. He owns the building, he furnished the apartment. Do you have proof he installed these? The apartment came furnished. These were already here when I moved in. Who else would have access? We'll need to establish that. Get copies of your lease, documentation of what came with the apartment, security footage from the building showing who had access to your unit. She called for a forensics team. They spent 4 hours documenting everything, photographing each camera, collecting them as evidence, dusting for fingerprints. Do the cameras have storage? Is there footage somewhere? Most of these are Wi-Fi enabled. They're streaming to a remote server. We'll need to trace the network to find out where the footage is going. Where the footage was going. Footage of me. 2 years of my life. Sleeping, changing, showering. Private moments I'd never consented to share. Can you find out who's been watching? We'll try, but if he's smart, he's routing through VPNs and encrypted servers. Might take time. They left around 4 p.m., told me to stay somewhere else for a few days while they investigated, told me not to confront my landlord, told me this was now a criminal investigation. I went to my sister's house, told her everything, watched her face go from disbelief to horror to rage. He's been watching you for 2 years? In your bedroom? In my bedroom, in my bathroom, everywhere. You need to sue him, like immediately. Get a lawyer, take him for everything he has. She was right, but first I needed to know the extent of the violation, needed to know what Robert had been doing with the footage, needed to know if I was the only victim, or if this was a pattern. The next day, Detective Park called. We traced the camera feeds. They were streaming to a server registered to Robert Chen. We got a warrant to search his property, found external hard drives with footage, years of footage, from multiple apartments. Multiple apartments? I wasn't the only one. Robert had been doing this to multiple tenants. How many others? We're still analyzing the drives, but preliminary count shows footage from at least 6 different units, going back 5 years. 5 years, 6 units, dozens of tenants, all filmed without consent, all violated the way I'd been violated. What happens now? We're arresting him today on voyeurism charges, multiple felony counts. You should get a lawyer. This is going to be a significant case. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, Teresa Rodriguez, specialized in privacy law and landlord-tenant disputes, came highly recommended for cases involving illegal surveillance. I showed her everything, the police report, photos of the cameras, Detective Park's preliminary findings. This is one of the clearest voyeurism cases I've ever seen. Criminal charges are already filed. Now we pursue civil damages, invasion of privacy, emotional distress, violation of landlord-tenant law. We're talking millions in damages. I don't care about the money. I care about making sure he never does this to anyone else. The money sends that message. We bankrupt him. We make it so expensive to violate people's privacy that he loses everything. That's how we ensure he never does this again. How much are we talking? For 2 years of illegal surveillance in your bedroom and bathroom? Conservative estimate $3 million. Could be more depending on what else we find. $3 million. The number felt abstract, meaningless compared to the violation, but Teresa was right. Financial devastation was the only language predators like Robert understood. I filed the lawsuit. Go after everything he has.
Robert was arrested on a Thursday morning. Made the local news. Seattle landlord arrested for installing hidden cameras in rental units. My phone exploded. Friends, coworkers, people I hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanting to know if I was okay, if I was the tenant mentioned in the news. I didn't respond to most of them. Couldn't handle explaining over and over what had happened. Couldn't handle the pity or the invasive questions. But other tenants started reaching out. Former residents of Robert's building, people who'd lived there years ago, all asking the same question. Was I recorded too? Detective Park's team was working through the footage, identifying victims, cross-referencing apartment numbers with rental records, building a timeline of Robert's surveillance operation. It had started 5 years ago, after Robert inherited the building from his parents. He'd begun installing cameras in furnished units, started small, 1 or 2 cameras per apartment, got bolder over time. By the time I moved in, he was installing comprehensive surveillance systems, multiple angles, high-quality equipment, professional installation. He'd been watching at least 15 different tenants over 5 years, mostly women, mostly living alone, mostly in their 20s and 30s. The pattern was clear. Robert had a type: young professional women living alone, willing to accept furnished apartments at slightly below market rate. I fit the profile perfectly. 28, working in tech, single, grateful for the deal on a nice apartment. He'd targeted me specifically, had probably screened applicants looking for someone who matched his preferences, had offered me the furnished unit knowing what he was planning. The violation went deeper than just the cameras. He'd manipulated the entire rental process to find victims. Other victims started coming forward. Women who'd lived in Robert's building years ago, who'd felt uncomfortable, who'd noticed things but dismissed them as paranoia. One woman said she'd found a camera in her bathroom vent, but Robert had convinced her it was part of the building's security system. She'd believed him because he was her landlord, because she trusted that he wouldn't lie about something like that. Another woman said Robert had asked for emergency access to her apartment multiple times, always when she wasn't home, always with excuses about repairs or inspections. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now she realized he'd been checking his cameras, adjusting angles, adding new devices. The more victims came forward, the clearer the pattern became. Robert had been running a systematic voyeurism operation for 5 years, had refined his techniques, had gotten away with it because his victims didn't know to look for cameras, didn't question why their landlord was so accommodating, didn't realize that below-market rent came with a hidden cost. My lawsuit was filed 2 weeks after Robert's arrest. Civil suit for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of Washington landlord-tenant law, and breach of the covenant of quiet enjoyment. We sued for $3.2 million. The number was calculated based on the duration of surveillance, the invasive nature of the cameras, the emotional harm, and punitive damages to send a message. Robert's lawyer tried to get the case dismissed, argued that the cameras were security devices and that I'd consented by signing a lease that mentioned building security systems. Teresa demolished that argument. Security cameras are disclosed and placed in common areas, not hidden in bedroom smoke detectors, not pointed at showers and beds, not installed secretly in private living spaces. This wasn't security, this was voyeurism. The judge agreed, denied the motion to dismiss, set a trial date for 6 months out. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. The prosecutor charged Robert with 15 counts of voyeurism, 1 for each identified victim. Each count carried a maximum of 5 years in prison. 15 counts, 75 years maximum sentence. Even with concurrent sentencing, Robert was facing serious prison time. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, plead guilty to 5 counts in exchange for dropping the rest, serve 3 years total, register as a sex offender. The prosecutor asked victim input, called me to ask if I'd accept the plea. No, I said immediately. He filmed 15 women without consent for 5 years. He doesn't get to plead down to 3 years. He doesn't get off easy because he's scared of consequences. A trial is risky. He could be acquitted on some counts, could serve less time than the plea offer. Then we take that risk. I want a jury to hear what he did. I want the evidence presented publicly. I want everyone to know exactly who Robert Chen is and what he did to us. The prosecutor went back to Robert's lawyer. No deal. We're going to trial. Robert's defense strategy became clear during pre-trial motions. His lawyer was going to argue that the cameras were for property protection and that Robert had a right to monitor his property, that tenants had no reasonable expectation of privacy in a rental unit. Teresa was outraged. He's arguing that landlords can put cameras in bedrooms and bathrooms, that renters have no privacy rights? That's insane. But it was a real legal strategy, and in some jurisdictions it had worked. Landlords had gotten away with surveillance by arguing property rights trumped tenant privacy. Not in Washington, not with this judge, not with this evidence. The judge issued a scathing ruling denying Robert's privacy argument. Tenants absolutely have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their bedrooms and bathrooms. Landlords absolutely do not have the right to install hidden cameras in private living spaces. This argument is frivolous and borders on sanctionable. Robert's defense collapsed. Without the property rights argument, he had nothing. The evidence was overwhelming. The footage proved everything. The cameras were hidden deliberately. The angles had been chosen specifically to capture intimate moments. He was guilty. The only question was how severe the punishment would be. 2 weeks before trial, Robert tried one more time to negotiate, offered to plead guilty to all 15 counts, accept 10 years in prison, pay full restitution to all victims, and forfeit ownership of the building, give up the property to be sold, with proceeds split among the victims. The prosecutor called me. It's a good offer. 10 years is significant time. Forfeiting the building means financial ruin for him, and you'd get a substantial payout without the stress of trial. I thought about it. 10 years meant Robert would be in his late 50s when he got out. His life would be destroyed. He'd be a registered sex offender, unemployable, bankrupt. But I thought about the footage. 2 years of my life recorded without consent, sleeping, changing, showering, private moments stolen and archived for Robert's viewing pleasure. I thought about the other victims. 15 women violated the same way, some for even longer than me. I want to hear the verdict. I want a jury to convict him. I want it on record that 15 people unanimously agreed he's guilty. The plea is good, but a verdict is better. You're sure? I'm sure. The trial started on a Monday in October. The courtroom was packed. Media, victims, supporters, people who'd followed the case and wanted to see justice. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Present the evidence, show the cameras, play the footage, redacted, just enough to prove what was captured without violating victims further. Bring witnesses to testify about the emotional harm. I testified on day 3, walked through the discovery, the shock, the violation, the knowledge that someone had been watching me in my most private moments for 730 days. Robert's lawyer tried to make me seem paranoid, suggested I'd known about the cameras and hadn't cared until I wanted money. Ma'am, isn't it true you never reported feeling uncomfortable in your apartment before finding the cameras? I felt safe in my apartment because I believed I had privacy. I didn't know I needed to sweep for hidden surveillance devices. Most people don't. But you accepted a furnished apartment at below market rent. Didn't that seem suspicious? No, it seemed like a good deal from a landlord I trusted. I didn't realize the true cost of that deal was my privacy and dignity. The jury's faces said everything. They weren't buying the defense's victim blaming. They were horrified. Other victims testified, story after story of violation, of discovering they'd been watched, of learning their most intimate moments had been recorded and saved. The defense called no witnesses. Robert didn't testify. His lawyer just argued that the prosecution hadn't proven intent, that maybe the cameras were installed by someone else, that maybe Robert didn't know they were there. No one believed it.
The jury deliberated for 4 hours, came back with guilty verdicts on all 15 counts of voyeurism. Robert sat stone-faced as the verdicts were read. His lawyer immediately filed notice of appeal. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The judge had discretion to run the sentences concurrently or consecutively. Concurrent meant Robert would serve them all at once, maximum 5 years. Consecutive meant stacking them, up to 75 years. The prosecutor argued for consecutive sentences. This wasn't one crime. It was 15 separate violations, 15 different victims, each deserving justice, each deserving to see this defendant held accountable for what he specifically did to them. Robert's lawyer argued for concurrent sentences and leniency. Robert was a first-time offender, had no criminal history, was remorseful, had already lost everything, his reputation, his business, his property. Except Robert wasn't remorseful, not really. He'd never apologized, never taken responsibility, never acknowledged the harm he caused. He'd only expressed regret for getting caught. Victim impact statements took an entire day. 15 women stood up and described what Robert's surveillance had done to them. Some talked about the violation, the knowledge that their most private moments had been stolen, the feeling of never being truly alone even in their own homes. Others talked about the aftermath, The anxiety, the paranoia, the inability to feel safe in any living space, the need to sweep every apartment for cameras, the suspicion of every landlord, every roommate, every person with access to their space. One woman talked about the destroyed relationship. Her boyfriend had left when he learned there was footage of their intimate moments, couldn't handle the violation, couldn't stay with someone who'd been watched without knowing. Another woman had quit her job and moved to a different state, couldn't stay in Seattle, couldn't live in a city where her voyeur might see her on the street. The impact rippled beyond just the surveillance. Robert had destroyed lives, shattered people's sense of safety, created trauma that would take years of therapy to process. I was the last victim to speak. Your Honor, Robert Chen stole 2 years of my life. He didn't steal my time or my money. He stole my privacy, my dignity, my right to exist in my own home without being watched and judged and recorded for someone else's gratification. I will never get those 2 years back. I will never unknow that someone was watching me sleep, shower, change, live. That knowledge is permanent. The violation is permanent. But you can send a message that this is not acceptable, that landlords do not have the right to spy on tenants, that property ownership does not override human dignity, that what Robert did deserves serious consequences. I'm asking for the maximum sentence, not because I'm vindictive, but because 15 women deserve justice, and future potential victims deserve protection from people like Robert Chen. The judge took 2 days to deliberate on sentencing. When we reconvened, her statement was clear. Mr. Chen, you held a position of trust. As a landlord, tenants relied on you to provide safe, private housing. Instead, you violated that trust in the most invasive way possible. You installed sophisticated surveillance equipment. You watched people in their most vulnerable moments. You archived and saved that footage for your own purposes. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic operation spanning 5 years and 15 victims. You targeted vulnerable people. You exploited the power imbalance between landlord and tenant. You showed no remorse even after being caught. The court sentences you to 5 years on each count to run consecutively. Total sentence, 75 years in state prison. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, crying, Robert's family sobbing in the gallery, his lawyer objecting loudly. Your Honor, 75 years for a nonviolent offense is excessive. Voyeurism is violence, counsel. It's psychological violence. It's sexual violence. It traumatizes victims. And when committed against 15 people over 5 years, it deserves a sentence that reflects the severity and scope of the harm. Robert was taken into custody immediately, let out in handcuffs while cameras flashed and victims cried tears of relief and vindication. 75 years. He'd be over 120 years old before his sentence ended. He'd die in prison. Some people thought it was too harsh, that nonviolent offenders didn't deserve life sentences, that the punishment didn't fit the crime. But those people hadn't been violated the way we had, hadn't experienced the horror of learning someone had been watching them for years, hadn't dealt with the trauma of knowing their most private moments were recorded and saved. The civil trial came 3 months later, my lawsuit against Robert and his insurance company. The insurance company tried to argue they weren't liable, that intentional criminal acts weren't covered under Robert's landlord liability policy. Teresa argued they were liable for failure to properly screen their insured, for not conducting basic background checks that would have revealed warning signs, for not requiring adequate safeguards against tenant privacy violations. The jury agreed with Teresa, found the insurance company partially liable, awarded me $3.2 million in damages, split between Robert's estate and the insurance payout. Robert had no assets left to pay. The building had been seized and sold, proceeds split among victims. He had no savings, no investments, nothing. But the insurance company had deep pockets. They paid $2.1 million from insurance. The rest would come from garnishing any future earnings Robert might have, though from prison that was unlikely. Other victims filed their own lawsuits. Similar amounts, similar verdicts. By the time all the civil cases settled, Robert and his insurance company were liable for over $40 million in damages. The building was sold to a property management company with strict privacy policies. New owners ripped out all electronics, installed new systems with transparent security measures. The ScrollTales community rallied around the victims, raised money for therapy, shared resources for dealing with trauma, created support networks for people who'd experienced voyeurism. Local laws changed. Seattle passed new ordinances requiring landlords to disclose all surveillance equipment, requiring regular privacy audits, imposing severe penalties for hidden cameras in rental units. The case became a landmark. The Chen case became shorthand for landlord voyeurism. Law schools taught it. Privacy advocates referenced it. Other victims used it as precedent.
2 years have passed since I found that first camera in my smoke detector. 2 years since my world shattered with the realization that my privacy had been violated for 730 days. Robert is in prison, serving his 75-year sentence at a state facility. I heard through the legal grapevine that he's appealing, trying to get the sentence reduced, arguing cruel and unusual punishment. His appeals keep getting denied. The evidence is too clear, the harm too extensive. The sentence, while severe, is legally justified. I'm not the same person I was before I found those cameras. I'm more suspicious, more careful. I sweep every apartment I visit for hidden devices. I cover laptop cameras. I'm hyper aware of anything that could be watching me. Some people think that's paranoia, that I'm letting what happened control my life. But I call it being informed. I know what's possible. I know how easy it is to hide cameras. I know predators exist, and they're often the people we trust most, like landlords. I moved out of Robert's building immediately after finding the cameras, obviously. Couldn't stay there, couldn't sleep in a bedroom where I'd been filmed. I moved in with my sister for 6 months while I apartment hunted, found a place that I personally renovated, brought in my own electronics, installed my own security system that I control, created a space where I know I'm safe. The $2.1 million settlement changed my life financially. I paid off student loans, bought a condo, invested the rest, set myself up for long-term security. But money doesn't fix trauma, doesn't erase the knowledge that someone watched me for 2 years, doesn't undo the violation. I've been in therapy, real therapy, with proper boundaries and privacy for 2 years, processing the trauma, learning to feel safe again, working through the anxiety and hypervigilance. My therapist says I have PTSD, that what Robert did constitutes sexual violence even though he never physically touched me, that voyeurism is traumatic, that my reactions are normal for someone who experienced this kind of violation. It helps to hear that, to know I'm not overreacting, that my fear and anger and inability to trust are reasonable responses to an unreasonable situation. I've connected with other victims. We have a private support group, meet monthly, share our experiences, support each other through the healing process. Some victims are doing better than others. Some have moved past the trauma. Others are still struggling. Everyone's healing timeline is different. One woman started a nonprofit, advocates for stronger privacy laws, educates renters about their rights, provides resources for detecting hidden cameras, turns her trauma into activism. Another woman wrote a book, memoir about her experience, how she survived, how she rebuilt. It became a bestseller, helped other voyeurism victims feel less alone. I've been interviewed by media, shared my story, used my platform to warn others, to push for legal reform, to make sure Robert's crimes lead to systemic change. Some interviews focus on the violation, others on the revenge. People are fascinated by the 75-year sentence, by the $40 million in civil judgments, by how completely Robert's life was destroyed. They ask if I feel guilty, if I think 75 years is too harsh, if I regret pursuing such severe consequences. I don't feel guilty. Robert had 15 victims, violated us for 5 years, showed no remorse. He deserves every year of that sentence. I don't think it's too harsh. Voyeurism ruins lives, creates lasting trauma, violates fundamental human dignity. Severe sentences send a message that this behavior is unacceptable. I don't regret anything. Pursuing criminal and civil cases was necessary for justice, for accountability, for prevention. The ScrollTales community has been incredible, supportive, protective, understanding in ways that people who haven't experienced this kind of violation can't be. They understand why I still check for cameras, why I'm suspicious of landlords, why I can't relax in spaces I don't control, why certain things trigger me, smoke detectors in particular. I can't be in a room with a smoke detector without checking it every single time. My friends and family try to understand, but they don't fully get it. They think I should move on or let it go, or not let Robert win by staying afraid. But I'm not afraid. I'm informed. I'm careful. I'm protecting myself based on knowledge of what's possible. That's not fear. That's survival. Robert tried to contact me once, 6 months into his sentence, sent a letter through his lawyer, wanted to explain and apologize. I didn't read it, sent it back unopened, because nothing Robert could say would change what happened, wouldn't undo the violation, wouldn't give me back my sense of safety. His lawyer said the letter contained an apology, said Robert was remorseful, said he wanted to take responsibility. Too late. Responsibility means facing consequences, which he's doing for 75 years. The other victims have mixed feelings about Robert's attempted apology. Some wanted to hear what he had to say. Others, like me, wanted nothing to do with him. There's no right way to respond to your abuser trying to apologize from prison. Everyone processes differently. I've been asked to speak at events, privacy conferences, tenant rights seminars, legal education programs, sharing my story, helping others understand the reality of voyeurism and landlord abuse. It's hard, reliving the experience for audiences, answering invasive questions, being reduced to the woman who was secretly filmed for 2 years. But it's also empowering, taking control of my narrative, using my experience to educate and protect others, turning trauma into purpose. I've helped other victims pursue their own cases, connected them with lawyers, shared resources, testified as an expert witness in similar trials. My case set precedent that helps others get justice. That feels meaningful, like what happened to me has value beyond just my personal suffering, like it's contributing to systemic change. Seattle now has some of the strictest landlord privacy laws in the country. Other cities have followed suit, partially because of my case, partially because of the advocacy that followed. Landlords are now required to disclose all surveillance equipment in rental units, required to obtain written consent for any cameras in private spaces, subject to random privacy audits, facing severe criminal and civil penalties for violations. The laws aren't perfect, but they're better than they were, and they're saving people from experiencing what I experienced. Would I go through it again knowing what I know now, knowing the trauma, the court battles, the public scrutiny, the permanent impact on my mental health? No, I wouldn't choose this. But I didn't have a choice. Robert made that choice for me when he installed cameras in my apartment. What I did have a choice about was how to respond, whether to stay silent or fight back, whether to accept a quiet settlement or pursue public accountability. I chose to fight, to expose, to ensure consequences, to turn my violation into systemic change. And I'd make that choice again. Because Robert is in prison, because laws have changed, because future potential victims have more protection, because other survivors have precedent to cite in their own cases. My suffering had purpose, had impact, had meaning beyond just what was done to me. That's not healing, but it's something. It's power reclaimed. It's refusal to be just a victim. It's turning the worst experience of my life into something that protects others. 2 years ago, I found cameras in my apartment, discovered I'd been watched for 730 days without consent, learned my landlord was a predator who'd victimized 15 women. Today, that landlord is in prison for 75 years. I have $2.1 million. Laws have changed. Other victims have gotten justice. The violation is permanent. The trauma is ongoing. The healing is slow. But so are the consequences for the person who violated me. And that's enough. Drop a comment with your platform of choice. Thumbs up if you learned something new. Share this post with friends. And subscribe for more ScrollTales drama.